get all the experience, get all the training, verify. Well, trust, but verify. But I'm usually verify, but verify. But trust, but verify would be the way my mom would want me to approach it. Be gracious.
Let's take this extra time to double check everything. Let's make this our best mission yet.
Amazon Ring and their Blink security cameras, and a fun 3-letter word, HDR. And then lastly, the fun one, sales and the alternative to cold calls. This is ResiWeek, episode 504, Verify, but Verify. This is ResiWeek. And as you may notice, this is not Matt Scott. It's Uncle Richie, Rich Fregosa, your pinch-hitting host for the day. We are here to bring you information and news about the residential market, and I'm just going to jump right into it. I've got two fantastic guests who are coming from different sides of the aisle, as they say. I'm going to start with my first guest, who we call a friend of the program, Brad Hintze, who is the Executive VP for Global Marketing for Crestron Electronics. That's a mouthful. Hey, Brad.
Hey, Rich. How's it going? So glad to be here.
Good to see you. And on the other side, representing in the blue corner, representing the integrator side, we've got Patrick Norton, who is a content specialist for CTI. First time meeting him, Patrick. I know you've been on the show before, or you've been affiliated with the show before. Welcome.
Pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
We're going to jump into some stories, but first, because I was curious, content specialist. So how does that... a little bit about what a content specialist does for CTI.
Well, a content creation specialist, in my case, I create everything from websites, video scripts, writing, web page updates. I'm responsible for making sure things are on message and brand compliance. To put that into context, I've got about 25 plus years in media, starting out with Ziff Davis magazines, doing technology product reviews, and probably have written about 2,000 product reviews in my life, at least 1,500, give or take.
That's impressive.
You keep doing something for long enough, the numbers start to add up.
It does.
So yeah, I've spent a lot of time being handed objects and figuring out if they do what they're supposed to do, and if they're worth the money people are charging for them, might be a gracious way of putting it. So.
Well, and before we got on and started recording, Mitch said that you also do have the question becomes then, well, what's your tie to Resi? And I know that you've got some deep-seated ties to Resi.
I spent a lot of years doing a podcast and before that a video program for home theater and audio, and approaching it from the early days. Yeah, I did a weekly technology program, and when we got to the point where a third of our questions were about HD, HD TVs, HDMI, the emerging Blu-ray and HD DVD technologies, we split off an entire show just dealing with that, and that's been doing various versions of that for probably close to 15 years now. And so I deal with people who are, wow, yeah, 100,000, great, done. To, wow, yeah, I have a dorm room and I want my movies to suck less. So we kind of go, the running joke is, the best in home theater, no matter what your budget is. And then we also started getting a lot of questions around the edges about home automation and some of the enthusiasm and frustration that is built around that at all levels and all market entry points over the last few years, decade and a half-ish. So,
well, you earned your bones, as they say, right?
I like to think so.
Well, great. Like I said, obviously I could make this a one-on-one interview, but I'm going to go ahead and jump right into the story so I can get Brad in on this as well. This one's the first story is coming to us from ResiTech. Amazon's Ring and Blink security cameras get clearer and smarter. You can find the link after the show on the webpage, and it'll kind of give you a little primer of what's going on. But long story short, cameras aren't going away. Cameras are becoming more ubiquitous. We're finding them in, obviously, the residential sector and other sectors. And kind of what Patrick was saying, there's some people who are like, I just want cameras. I'm not going to go nuts on it and go with a James Bond style layout with laser guided functions, but I want something that's going to suck less. I'm going to pose this to you, Brad. From a manufacturer's standpoint, you don't make cameras. You make some cameras.
Not on the Resi side, we don't. We do on the commercial side.
On the commercial side, you do.
Yep.
But this is a vertical that you have to interact with your devices. Where are the pluses, but where are the potential pitfalls that integrators are going to deal with when we have something like a large company like Amazon who's basically saying, we're going to push these out, and there's going to be acceptance by the masses, and we have to provide solutions along the way?
Well, I think that there are several things that an integrator has to keep in mind in this particular category. Large brands like an Amazon are going to invest here because there's consumer interest and demand, right? They acquired a company that can bring that technology together. They acquired Ring to bring that into their business. And so their massive investments will certainly help drive awareness to the what technology could do within a home, and I think that's certainly a great thing for our industry. I think the other thing is that their investments are massive and will end up also raising the bar in terms of the expectations of consumers for what that technology can do for them, right? And I don't think that's a bad thing. I think it's a new expectation now, right? That consumer grade level of polish and great ease of use and simplicity. That's something that Amazon will bring to it, which I think is a good thing as well. It challenges all of us to think about what are the user experiences that we deliver. What is that experience actually like? Are we meeting those expectations? It used to be 10 years ago, we had to convince homeowners, hey, this is what technology could do for you. Now they've lived with it. Now they've seen it in other contexts, and now they know what they want it to do. And so you can get to that area where it is more of a partnership between you and the homeowner, which is always interesting. But it's going to put pressure on an integrator to also learn and know other areas. Security becomes of much greater importance, right? Making sure that you have your network configured appropriately, that you have all the passwords reset and configured well, right? All the things that are now just table stakes, and you have to know them, right? You can't just roll up and just plug in consumer grade stuff and just like walk away. You have to really think about that, and that's part of the value that the integrator channel can bring to homeowners, is that knowledge, that expertise, that peace of mind. But it will also put pressure on the home infrastructure, the home networking infrastructure too, which is yet another area where we can deliver value to a homeowner. Make sure they have a rock solid network so that they can view their cameras and keep the family connected to the network, right? And anything else that they want connected. So all of these things I think are good opportunities ultimately for our industry, but we have to come in and think about them really carefully.
Let's just kind of roll it back, and you've got your podcast, or you've got, you're writing about this. What are you going to tell an integrator? Because again, you've got an Amazon coming in, and let's face it, one of the things for integrators, it's always about, how do I stay profitable? How do I stay in business? How can I take something that's being offered and can be delivered by drone in 2 hours and actually make a living doing this?
Well, Ring, much like Eero, are networking-based products or companies that Amazon acquired, right? Because essentially, we're selling a lot of this stuff. Why don't we buy that company, right? And that's just kind of what Amazon does at this point. They have a lot of money to reinvest and to expand their portfolio. They are finally offering some stuff that's more integrator-oriented. And I think that's the real challenge, right? Because if I'm, I have friends who have small businesses who still do everything over PoE, and it's like PoE traditional security cameras going to that standalone box that I'm pretty sure you can still buy at Costco, whatever the latest version of that is, because they don't want anybody else to have access to this video, right? And that's one of the things about Ring, right? Part of the attraction there is like, one of the new features, it's going to be able to use, Alexa Plus to do AI to be like, oh, we saw the neighbor's cat, the neighbor searching for the cat. We can tell, we saw the cat go by at 2 a.m. or whatever that is. It's going to be able to do some facial recognition. It's going to be able to engage with people at your door, right? And that's Ring sort of advancing, they want to keep selling more hardware, right? right? You've had that doorbell for 6 years. What can we give you to buy a new doorbell so we make more money? I think the challenge for integrators is making sure that whatever they are offering either builds upon this, the features, or offers something vastly better, or simply works better the way the client wants to. And that can be really challenging in something like this because, for anybody who ever dealt with like crappy video cameras at a restaurant, and then they were like, I don't want any of that stuff near my house. And then Ring comes along and your neighbor has it, and you've decided you've had it, and the whole neighborhood gets excited about it because we're going to be secure and we're going to record everything. You really have to offer something that kind of takes a step beyond. And I don't know what that would be for the integration community, but I'm sure there's a whole bunch of people out there with some ideas on that one.
Well, I think that along those lines, it is becoming that expert partner to discuss some of these things with the homeowner. I think that's certainly fertile ground for making sure they have a really good experience, and then they have that peace of mind from a security perspective. But there are also other hairy issues that we should be in a position where we can, again, partner with the homeowner to understand. You say facial recognition, and that's compelling. It's interesting, but there are a lot of sticky legal issues as it relates to that. And the ability to at least speak to those concerns and or those ideas intelligently with a homeowner, that's valuable, right? And, providing that kind of insight and experience to a homeowner so that they can help make an informed decision is an area where the integrators, our integration channel, can provide value to homeowners as they explore some of this technology.
Well, and you've got a direct-to-consumer product. And so the minute that you become kind of the aggregator for information, it's important to know what you're getting into. It becomes that line, which is, where does your support go? Where doesn't it? We can go on this one, but I'm gonna move on to the next one, because I think this one actually is also pretty meaty. The article itself isn't, but the conversations that it brings up, because I know it's something that you two are dealing with across many verticals, not just the Resi side. But this one's coming from CE Pro, and it talks about something that most integrators are just start shaking their head over. It's how content to device discrepancies lead to a dynamic range mismatch. What does that mean? 3 letters: HDR. From the technical standpoint, in the old days, in analog, 3 of us actually can remember the days of component cables and sitting there with BNC connectors and putting them in switchers. We only had to deal with some frequencies to get from point A to point B. Once we moved into digital video, we had to move into EDID, electronic device identification, which was a go, no go, or a really weird situation where the image is not going to wind up from one side to the other. I'm going to start with you, Brad, because I think where this comes in is that obviously we've got local device connections, and this is, if you ever talk to any integrator, this is always one of the ones that's going to be popping up. But there's something new that we're dealing with now, which is audio video over IP and those standards. And you get one more layer that comes in. The article itself talks about the consequences when dynamic ranges are off. And it's huge. It's noticeable. It's a visible difference. If you've ever set it up wrong in an installation, you know that you set it up wrong in that moment. And then you're spending the rest of your time going, how do I fix this? So, again, from a manufacturer standpoint, this is something that, and even from the marketing standpoint, there's a whole lot of reasons why certain manufacturers do what they do. Where does HDR fall in this? And from a manufacturer standpoint, how are you able to deal with these?
Well, I think that it's funny because being at Crestron and being in this video distribution realm for a long time, it is important to remember that just because there's a standard and just because it looks like a plug that can fit in there doesn't mean it's going to work every time. And you have to understand all of the technologies that play into it. I've heard stories of the old Plug Fest days where all the manufacturers show up with their products, and then everybody else has their products, and you're just wheeling a cart around, plugging it in and seeing if that works. And so, we are, as an integration channel and as an industry, we have to have that experience and the knowledge to understand how to apply these, how to bring the right products in, together. And HDMI, HDR is certainly one conversation. There's also USB-C is yet another one, right? It's equally as confusing, if not more so, because of all of the many ways that you can apply that connector and do so many different kinds of things with that. But as an integrator, invest the time to understand all of these technologies that are coming together. Also, spend the time to go in and get trained from all of your manufacturing partners so that you understand the intent, how these things happen, right? So that you can go and fix it. It's not the case that you can just hire anybody off the street and say, just go plug all these things in, right? You have to actually architect the system and build it together so that you can get that maximum kind of an experience, and then look for ways, like whether it is AV over IP or a known and trusted system extension system to get that kind of system experience that you're looking for.
So I'm going to go ahead with Patrick. So you've got somebody who comes up and they're hooking up their system and there's 14 different options and they see 4K SDR, 4K HDR, 3D, 4K 60, all of these things that lead into it. Where do we untangle, that ball of yarn?
So, Jeff Picacio, the guy who wrote this article, one of the things he calls back to was a previous article that was in part about DPL Labs and their 48G reference testing tools, and partially also about, the entire article is basically talking about how, just because you have a certified HDMI cable doesn't mean it'll actually perform up to the certification. Either because, he calls out one thing, the golden sample where one cable was sent for certification and it passed, and now they get to put it on the millions of cables that go into production. The other thing is they test a few and those passed and everything's golden. But the reality is HDMI was a 4-letter word before I started dealing with commercial integration. HDMI is a much more emphatic 4-letter word dealing with commercial integration because it's often so much more complex, and it's amazing how bad we choose, CTI chooses its vendors incredibly carefully in no small part because they don't want to have to deal with that HDMI cable didn't work. Is it that HDMI cable, or is it because they talk about in this article okay, if your HDMI cable does amplification and it doesn't work, even though that cable's worked in other environments. And it's okay, we're going to get a shorter cable, or we're going to start with a 2-foot cable and then move to a 3-foot cable and then move to a 4-foot cable and then move to a 5-foot cable until something fails and figure out what it is. Brad, I think you called out CEC and some of the other stuff. HDMI is one of those places where nobody has to actually call out how they implement something, or, it's watching HDMI sounds so easy. And in practice, it is such a hot mess in so many areas, especially in residential, maybe less so in commercial. But, I think the challenge is that, it would be nice for us all to move on to a better standard that, is actually standardized across all vendors from the start. But that may be me being a little cranky on a Monday afternoon.
Well, that's the thing with standards, right? There's always another one to go and try and build, right? There's plenty to choose from. No, I was actually referring to USB-C, right?
Oh,
because
another hot mess.
Yeah, another hot mess, right? It is ubiquitously available. It can control and work with so many different things, and yet you really have to understand a lot of the details behind behind the standard, behind the products that you're trying to connect together, the quality of the cables. Everything still applies as it does in HDMI, but it's a whole nother realm, right? Now you're talking about power. Now you're talking about Ethernet. You're talking about all these other technologies that are layered on top of it. But it's still the same becomes true. Go get educated. You have to, our role as an industry is to know this and apply it in the right way. Be that expert and provide that level of guidance. And so, our industry is complex and it will always be complex. and it's the role of all of us to try and simplify that for others by being that expert.
Well, we talk about HDR, which is kind of the visual effect, and anybody who's done, myself included, HDR wrong, and when you're expecting a black screen and you've got this really deep green screen, and you're sitting there and wondering what the heck just happened to this. It comes to another 4-letter word that, I think that when I'm dealing with integrators, that even with clients, I've spent my time explaining, we take care of the engineering side and the technology side. Unfortunately, there's a part of this video cable that was designed by a committee of attorneys, and nothing good ever comes from lawyers and technology. And this does go hand in hand with HDCP, HD copyright protection, where a lot of times your image isn't making it from one side to the other, not because it doesn't have the available bandwidth, it doesn't have the voltage, it doesn't, the tab A to slot B isn't there, but it's because somewhere down the line, the negotiation between the two, it takes a brick wall approach, which is, I've just decided you aren't legal because I'm not going to give you a reason why. I'm just going to say you are, and now let's see what happens. How do we advise integrators, not only because again, picture quality, we're looking at this and saying, yes, you've got your LED wall that you've put in, you're playing F1 and something just doesn't look right. But then you have the other side, which is all of a sudden it starts blinking in between. And how do I deal with it? Now, those are two similar symptoms, but they're two different problems. How do we, again, from the manufacturer side, how do you bridge those? How do you explain to your integrators, hey, these are your best practices, and this is why you should be going down this route?
Well, I know one, but maybe it's taboo to say. But by a good AV over IP system that has solved solved these problems in a scalable way and can deliver the right the right content when you need it. Right, you can do all the EDID management, all the HDCP, all that for you. So I think that just because a system claims it's AV over IP, just because it claims that it can do HDR, you need to trust and then verify that it will actually do that. Work with a reputable manufacturer all across the chain, right? And then, like I said, go in and get trained. Spend the time to really understand the technology, and that will speed up all of the troubleshooting that you need to go through.
A lot of that article was talking about dynamic range mismatch, in that the signal level was so low it would fail even in situations where it would not normally fail. But I mean, Brad nailed it on the head. Get all the experience, get all the training, verify. Well, trust, but verify. But I'm usually verify, but verify. But trust, but verify would be the way my mom would want me to approach it. Be gracious.
Verify, but verify. I'm still in that one, right? All right. Well, we're not gonna go ahead and kind of throw more body blows to HDR at this point. We're gonna move on to one which honestly is something that we need to be considering if you're an integrator, a small integrator, large integrator. I mean, it really doesn't matter what the vertical is, but we do recognize that there may be changing economic conditions coming up. There's potential gloom and doom. There's other sides that are saying, hey, this is the great opportunity to move on. We've seen this in the industry before with different outliers, and we've seen it in 2000. We've seen it in 2008. We've seen some things that have made it a little difficult to find business. And so our article comes from Residential Systems, and it's written by Henry Clifford. And it's interesting because it's not in nuts and bolts, here's how you put in a TV. Here's how the quality. This is, for anybody watching, this is the business of doing business side of things and being in front of what may happen instead of reacting to what's happening. And he talks about the alternative to cold calls. What does that mean? Well, when you're starting out as a salesperson, we talked about it. This is not the Glengarry Glen Ross where the guy comes in with the box and says, these are the leads, covet them, and the leads are the leads, and this is all you get. That's one way, hopefully, but If you're an established business or you're a salesperson for a business, and you're trying to drive growth and you're trying to make your paycheck, Henry goes into there is a process that you can continue if you're not the type to pick up the phone and just go through the list of leads. How do you work your way through to generate value that you're not automatically being tossed out? And he goes through, kind of some priority levels. Talks about, a warm email and starting out with, an intro and a call to action. I'm going to hit on Brad on this one's real quick because, marketing 101, right? We're going to kind of get into the golden rules of marketing. A personal text, keeping it short and casual, driving value in a brief ask. If you have professional contacts, using your LinkedIn or your professional contacts where you're hitting them not only from the personal side, but hey, maybe this is value to your business, or maybe your brain is going to interpret the request a different way. Moving then on to a warm call, right? And so this is from kind of the hot points on down, which is, hey, a warm call is somebody known. I've always said, and I've been on these shows before, that, in my different incarnations as a dealer, as a consultant, what we do now, but a lot of sales when I was starting out, the best customer is always the one who you sold something to. And finding ways to not start from scratch. And then he goes into the cold call itself, which is, yeah, you can do it, but in terms of the risk reward, you've got to have a plan. So here's, and I appreciate it because not very often are companies going to go into what they feel is their secret sauce. And even though it's not secret, it still sometimes just reinforces, hey, here are the steps that you can take while you're looking at where your business is going. So Brad, kind of marketing 101, is he on point?
I think that it's worth having this conversation on a regular basis because the reality is that both professionally and personally in our lives, our community, the way that we consume and connect with others has evolved. And, as a business trying to get in front of other professionals and other homeowners, you have to be sensitive to that reality and you have to mix up the toolbox that you have. But our industry isn't unique, right? Many industries are trying to do the same thing. And so you have to factor that in. How do you, it is interesting when I look back at my career, 10 years ago, I started getting texts from colleagues. It's like, oh, this is kind of weird. But now it's totally normal, right? It is totally normal to get texts, whether it's people I know already or just people reaching out and evolving. And so you in your outbound marketing effort have to evolve and change to that. But at the end of the day, be visible, add value, right? Be where your customers are. And, find a good mix of new approaches, whether that's via social, reaching out, whether that's getting people to subscribe and give you permission to reach out via text. Or, it is the old tried and true of, hey, send a mailer, right? Sometimes it is easier to just cut through the noise with a really nice postcard or a really nice FedEx package if there's a high value client that you're trying to get in front of, right? So yeah, I think it's good to have the conversation, but don't abandon the good tried and true marketing tactics. But always look for those new channels that develop and evolve and change with the tastes and preferences of those that you're trying to target.
So Patrick, so on your view, because again, you've got a unique viewpoint in that impact is really what you're looking for. I mean, that's the core of kind of the results of your process.
Just the title of this article alone, right? The alternative to cold calls. And all I could think was, who cold calls anymore, right? Because I get, who do I get cold called by? Fly-by-night roofers who are coming through my neighborhood in St. Louis, scammy places that are like trying to buy my house. Are you the owner of the property at blah, 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 blah Avenue? Have you considered, and it's like, it's crazy, right? But in a generation, you have a situation where like I might have answered a strange number. I might have enthusiastically answered a strange number. Now I will avoid a strange number by the plague. And if they don't leave a voicemail message, I know I made the right choice, right? And it's, there's still a lot of people are like, yeah, I'm going to buy a mailing list and it's going to generate leads. Well, again, that's great in Glengarry, Glen Ross, but, today, if somebody's selling you leads, they're probably crap. Maybe people out there have a different experience, right? But his whole thing is like, you're giving, you're reaching out to people, you're giving them useful knowledge, you're passing along compliments, you're building a soft relationship through the tools you have available, right? Through, word of mouth, through platforms like LinkedIn or wherever it is, and once you establish that relationship, right? And his whole stack there is like, if I'm getting a text message that was like, have you considered buying a new home? I'm going to be like, no, not from a random text message. Or my personal favorite, the ones that are like trying to give me banking information, but are tied to Russian email addresses. That's a strong one to avoid. But it's like, if I'm going through email, I will spend 10 seconds reading something and it might engage me. Text, not so much. A DM in LinkedIn. It amazes me how many people waste opportunities in LinkedIn by running bots, where if they'd actually sent a legit, a legit DM, I might actually engage it. But, it's like, dear insert name here, who works at company that does marketing. And it's like, you obviously suck at marketing because you sent this to me and I'm never going to look at that again. Right. But, they talk about like, what can you do quickly and efficiently, and that whole idea where, okay, I'm going to lean into the opportunity before I make an ask. And that's, I think, a lot of people kind of forget about is social engineering and building relationships. I read a great article recently. It talked about how so many people who have been raised in environments where like they pay all their bills online, they deal with all their forms online, they don't have to go to the DMV anymore, and they don't learn those basic skills of being patient and the little bits of social engineering of what we like to call being polite, and how it when they actually have to deal with, difficult situations in a face-to-face situation or where they're building a relationship, they don't have any practice. And it's like, you should always be practicing this. You should always be looking for opportunities and throwing out some positive energy and some useful things. And then you will probably find people are more receptive when you do want to make an ask of them. But, a lot of this is just reminding people that like, hey, the old ways are pretty much dead. You want to light money on fire, do a mailer. You want to light money on fire, cold call people. It was a good read. It's a nice reminder.
Now you got the flip side, and it's one that I'm currently struggling with just in how we position in our company and kind of advising others is that AI. There is at times a reliance with AI as a magic bullet, which is I'm sure you're getting them as much as I get to. I think that somebody who does a machine level synopsis of whatever it is, and next thing I know, what could have been a 2-second effective blurb just became their PhD dissertation that they didn't write. Right? We're all seeing them now with the points, right? And it's just like, and I always feel like whoever typed it is like, okay, now make it more sellier. No, double it, how are we going to deal with that? I mean, because again, Henry's article didn't touch on it, but we're seeing it. I know you are. I know and right now you can kind of feel it. You can feel when it is a artificially generated tone. Where do we go with that? Because it's obviously a tool, but is that something dealers should be considering as well?
I think they should certainly be considering it. There are areas where you can apply the tool that will give you great value, right? And that is, identify how are people coming to your website? Why are they coming there? Right? Automated responses if they inquire with you and then respond right away, but then have some humans step in. So it won't replace that human touch. I think that, you have to, particularly in a service related industry like ours, you have to deliver that human connection as well, but you also have to be super responsive. And so how can you add on that responsiveness without losing or diluting the human nature side of it? And so I think that we have to look for ways to figure that out. And it's not just more spam, more marketing, more words, right? It's smart workflows in the way that you interact with your businesses. And it could be too, you shift it out of email into text and you're back and forth, right? I have so many of the service providers that I work with exclusively via text, right? And I know some of the scheduling, some of that mundane stuff is all by AI, and that's super helpful, right? But when I call somebody or when I have a really important question, having a human step into that is really important. So designing those workflows, I think, are really critical for the integrators that are trying to scale their business up, to stay relevant, and to meet the expectations of all the other service providers that a homeowner may be working with. You have to look at these kinds of services, but you also can't dilute the core value proposition, which is your own expertise, that human side of it, and being right there.
All right, well, I'll let you chime in at the very end, Patrick. How do we prevent Patbot 2.0 from their marketing message?
Well, I mean, the nice thing is, I write for a living, so writing clear and concise and thoughtful things is something I've spent my entire life adult life doing. So on one hand, I get why people want to be like, oh, just let Chat GPT take care of that. But, I was laughing. Laughing's not the right word. I can't say that the AI update to the app for my ISP destroyed my relationship with that ISP, because my relationship with the ISP was basically, as long as I get internet and it's symmetrical, I will pay them money, and that's all the relationship we need, right? Because, and I went through a phase recently where we started having intermittent dropouts, and they were going to roll a truck, but it seemed to fix itself, so they didn't do it. We were going to roll, and finally it got to the point where I had 11 outages in 3 days, and it went from, and I should also point out that, I kept getting to this point where, the AI was like, just reboot your router, reboot your ONT, reboot your router, reboot your ONT. So finally, and there was no longer a way to initiate a customer support call from the app because it had AI now. So I end up having to go to the website, dig out the 1-800 number, call the 1-800 number. And then it was like 3 days of me being like, it's going out at the, the fiber's crashing at the, between the ONT and the router. They're like, well, it's probably your personal Wi-Fi. Great. So I strip my Wi-Fi equipment out. It keeps failing. Well, it's the Ethernet cable. And I strip my Ethernet cable and replace it with a known good Ethernet cable. And then finally, after an extra 6 calls in 3 days, they finally roll a truck. And the technician's like, oh, you got an ONT plugged into a blah, 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 blah. Yeah, that's the problem. You see, the blah, 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 blah has an internal ONT, and, this is a known issue. I'm like, could somebody tell that to the people with the database for the tech, for the, and it's, that's, an extreme example at scale, but in a smaller case, it's like, if you're going to run things through Chat GPT or any other, AI system, remember, like, Chat GPT may have written it, but it's your neck on the line if it invents a quote or invents a statistic or misquotes a number or pops a couple zeros in. And that's what is challenging, is because the promise of a lot of the AI, or what's being promised, is far ahead of what it's actually delivering for people. And that's been like, I still laugh because somebody's like, I tried to get it to do this. And somebody's like, well, of course it didn't do this. It's a large language model. It doesn't know how to count. Like, it can pass the bar exam and it can pass like SATs, but it can't count. He's like, don't let me, and everybody's, if you're watching the video, you see a lot of smiling faces right now. But, I think it's something you edge into your systems. You trust but verify. You keep an eye on stuff, because at this point, it's all, there's so much promise and so much weirdness when you get the output in your hands. So that's my 2 cents on AI right now.
Well, I'm going to keep my promise to keep this show under 4 hours, because when Uncle Richie gets on a fireside chat, all bets are off. So we're going to wrap it up with that and some great information. I'm going to go ahead and thank both my guests, Patrick Norton from CTI. If people want to contact you or find out more about you, content specialty, or CTI in general, how can they find you?
CTI, the best place to go is always cti.com on the internet. And if you want to learn more about me, you can find me at Patrick Norton on Blue Sky or on X, formerly known as the Twitters.
Brad Hintze, it's always great having you. Thanks for taking the time during your busy day as an executive VP. But if people do want to find out more about you, get in contact, find out more about Crestron or just Brad in general, like you're talking about. Hopefully not random texts from chat bots, but how can they find out about more about you and Crestron?
Crestron.com is a great place to get started. And then you can also follow me on LinkedIn, just as Brad Hintze on LinkedIn.
There we go. Well, gentlemen, thank you for your time. That's going to be our show. I am going to be wrapping up and saying, don't follow me. Follow these people. Follow these gentlemen. Hopefully the best way that you do find me, as I've said, is if you can find me here on AVNation and our suite of shows, our verticals, which include ResiWeek, AVWeek, a State of Control with my partner, Steve Greenblatt. We've got tons and tons of offerings available and great voices out there. So hopefully you'll find us there. If you do want to find me, you can find me at Rich Fregosa on the previously known X or all of the socials. But with that said, this is Uncle Richie for ResiWeek.
The network for the AV industry.
What are you listening to?
This
This is AV.
This
is AVNation.
This is AVNation.
Hello, this is Steve Greenblatt, host of AVNation's A State of Control podcast. Each month, Rich Fregosa and I explore trending topics related to control programming and automation in the audiovisual industry. We speak with a variety of AV professionals who share their perspectives, knowledge, and experiences. Please join us for this monthly conversation. Check out A State of Control on avnation.tv or wherever you get your podcasts.